Gotta start recording. So welcome everybody to episode 11, Conversations from the Front Porch. I'm your host, Hollis Thomases, and with me this evening is Guillermina Gonzalez. She's episode 11's guest. Guillermina is the executive director of the Delaware Arts Alliance and an adjunct professor for Wilmington University. Guillermina, say hello. How are you?
Oh, how are you? Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for being my guest and being here tonight. As we know, we had to reschedule, but you've been very gracious and we've made it happen. So for everybody's benefit, you're here for Reinvention Works, which is the destination for all things reinvention. We're here to empower, inspire, and motivate businesses and people to take control and move on to their next destiny. So this webcast series is meant to do just that. It's real conversations with real people who have reinvented their lives so that you can learn from them, the real world experts. I am just your host, Hollis Thomases. I also happen to be a reinventionist. So, Guillermina, what we're going to do now is just talk a little bit about our beverage of the evening. I normally have wine, but this evening my beverage is effervescence water. I've carbonated it myself with my favorite soda stream machine. It's
Good.
very economical and it's refreshing. And I'm tired. It's late at night and I've worked a long week. So, Guillermina, what are you drinking? Nothing?
You know what? I didn't even have the chance to go and drink anything because
Here, I'll give you some, babe.
thank you. Appreciate that. Appreciate that.
You'll be parched.
Yes. Anyway, maybe for some other occasion, for the time being, let me thank you for inviting me to your reinvention programs. I think it's very important to share stories like that. And well, I think we've been there, done that in terms of reinventing ourselves. Began in corporate America, as you know, many years ago, and I worked for corporate America for many years. And then came to the US in 2001 with an expatriate assignment, thinking that I was going to go back to Mexico, the place where I grew up and was born and did all my professional life. And then, well, life happens. Came here, met my husband Charles, and then things went from one place to the other, and decided to move away from corporate America. Began working with the not-for-profit sector, and this is the second organization that I lead. Prior to that, I was leading Voices Without Borders. So I think I'm in the not-for-profit sector by choice, and I'm deeply enjoying it and doing it. It brings a lot more meaning that I used to have in the past. And I think it was about time for me to change and switch gears. We all know that we change as we move on. So it was not necessarily by choice, but I think change is to be embraced, and finding the best out of each one of the situations that life presents. And I'm here enjoying deeply myself, and making a contribution. I would like to think that my work somehow brings the arts to a different level. Even the business perspective that is very much needed in the not-for-profit sector, but clearly there's a correlation, believe it or not, in between the arts and businesses. So the reinvention, I wouldn't say that I reinvented myself. Probably reinvention invented me.
well, that's actually an interesting place to start. You kind of overviewed and glossed over a lot of your reinvention. So let's get into some of the nitty gritty.
Okay.
First of all, I think you're kind of right about maybe you didn't initially intend to reinvent because, if I'm not mistaken, you met your husband on that plane flight. Did you
Yes.
not?
Yes, I did.
So it's not like you went looking for love on a plane.
No.
It found you,
Yes.
but you did decide to follow your heart, which then made such substantial and radical divisions for you. You upended your life to in pursuit of that. And so I'm sure that was not a off the cuff sort of unconsidered decision,
Uh-huh.
and you had to be thinking pretty hard and clear about what you were doing and how that might affect your life.
Well, this is the beauty of making this kind of decisions. You don't necessarily think about this. You embrace it. I mean, when an opportunity like that, I mean, you met your better half once in your lifetime. So I think for the first time, actually, I let life happen. So I had my life so well mapped out that derailed all my plans in a very nice way. But by the same token, I would say that a collateral situation was the fact that I found myself in a different country without expecting to do that, without a job, so everything what I thought was important at that point in time was just taken away from me. And I was not necessarily thinking about that. Probably if I had thought about the impact and ramifications of my jumping into something, probably it wouldn't have been so readily uh, taken the decision. And nevertheless, I did. No complaints, zero complaints. Um, but forced me to think in a very linear way, um, because what I thought was providing me value was not there anymore. It was more like, this is you and only you in a different country with people you don't know, and not my family around, just my husband back then and still here. So it brought me the capacity of removing the intellectual fat to find a leaner version of myself.
That's such a great way of putting it. I really like that. First of all, you're removing the intellectual fat to find a leaner you. And you know, one would wonder, for example, sure, you had no family and you were leaving a job, but you had amazing credentials. You're bilingual. You're coming to a country that's like the epitome of capitalism.
Mhm.
Why did you just not do more of the same? Was it that removal of the intellectual fat and the giving the time to think about what you wanted to do next?
Yes.
So that's the part that got deliberate.
Yeah, I think it found an outlet. Once I didn't have, I mean, you love the six figures, you love the pampered life, you love to be at a certain point admired for the high position you have. When you become an expatriate, you are part of the elite of an organization, and that part of the elite of Exxon. I mean, why moving things if they are not necessarily? And there you see my cat just crossing.
It's fabulous.
Right. So this is really, really from the front porch. In this case, it's from my home office.
From the loft.
That's right. In any event, it's not like that easy the decision, because it brings a lot more factors than honestly I was anticipating. So anyway, I kind of lost a little bit of my line of
We were talking about why not go back into corporate America here in the States.
right, because I was thank you. I was considering at one point doing that, and actually tried going back to Xerox, for instance, one of the corporations that I worked for in Mexico. I have to say that I was ready to move on. I worked for corporate America even before finishing my bachelor's degree, so I began working very early and all the time in corporate America. I think I had my portion of corporate America covered, so I was not necessarily that fascinated to go back and do the exact same things, because at the end of the day, I mean, you can have many breads, but at the end of the day, it's always bread. So I thought it's important to have more meaning in the things that I do now that I have the chance to think and make a different kind of contribution. So I was consciously moving away from corporate America. I know that I can always go back, maybe not at this point, it might not be that easy. But the expatriate experience, I realize that helps you when you go back to your place of origin. Is not necessarily that appreciated in a different country. It could
Hmm.
be but it's not the same thing. My value as a professional probably increases if I go back to Mexico and do the exact same things. But bottom line, even if I go back to Mexico, I don't think I'm going to go back to corporate America. I find the things that I do a lot more meaningful nowadays. I connect with, in this case, the arts world in the state. It is refreshing to relate to artists. They open up my mind in many ways because I think differently. I'm very business oriented, yet I learn from them in the sense that not necessarily my approach, the business approach, or the more logic way of thinking is what brings results. So it opens up possibilities, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I think it's important to remain flexible, linear at all times, and that keeps me on my toes because I need to galvanize troops. I need to understand where they are, where they're coming from, and in a way refreshes and brings back memories about keeping myself lean and always readily accepting change, which is that was not my case before because I was so happily doing what I was doing. And the six figures, once you decide to move to the not-for-profit sector, one of the things that you need to be conscious about is that six figures might not be there anymore. So it's a lifestyle change.
Right.
But I think it's a conscious decision that has brought a lot more meaning, and I like that.
So, a couple of things. Would you mind, you don't have to give exact age, but about like in what decade did you decide all of this? When was this happening in your life? And do you think that it would have happened eventually anyway, that just it was precipitated by the fact that you were moving to this foreign country with no job?
What triggered the change and the expatriate opportunity was my internal need of change. I remember going back to my boss and saying, I really need a change. I really need to move on, and I like to, have a different kind of challenge. I always was part of the commercial side of business, meaning sales and marketing, particularly marketing. So I was very much into that sector. And they listen. Next thing I know, I'm being offered this expatriate assignment. Prior to that, they considered me to become the next HR director for the company in Mexico. Situation that when I was consulting to my high level sources within Exxon, they told me in this company to grow up is, of course, HR is not part of the line for you to become a super high big shot. So forget about that. If you want to do that, you need to remain in the commercial area, which I did. Next thing I know, they said, and by the same token, we want you here in the US. They wanted me to be exposed to a different market, to have a, more clear the Exxon thinking in a different market. And then the intention was to make me go back and take another position for the company. So that need of change was there regardless of the situation, and that triggered when I verbalized that everything happened, and then it went
Exactly.
deeper. It went deeper when once I was here because I realized that it was no longer corporate America. So I think things happen for a reason, but internally speaking, your clock is ticking and not necessarily the biological clock. But I'm talking about internal needs that trigger the need for something else to happen.
Right.
It's important to listen to your own internal clock or guidance or the north that is being presented to you. And at least I was open for that voice. And I said, well, let's just embrace it. And
Right.
so far, I think the results are, I'm okay with what I got.
Right. Well, it's almost like the fact that you had already recognized that you needed a change and you acknowledged that not just to yourself, but you verbalized it. And then you kind of got what more than you bargained for because had you said, you had your whole life mapped out, you had a route in mind, and it wasn't initially your intent to deviate from that, but all of a sudden you had this urge to change and you got thrown a change.
Yeah.
So your whole notion of it was maybe meant to happen, it kind of does sound like it was maybe meant to happen, but you were ready for it to happen, so you were more open to having it happen. And I would ask you then, how did you choose the nonprofit world to move into? Was it that you were looking for something that gave you more meaning, or did you just get thrown another opportunity?
Well, I was not looking for the not-for-profit sector. The not-for-profit sector looked for me. I began when having more time at my disposal. I was invited to be part of different organizations in different capacities, sometimes part of board of directors, sometimes helping in projects. In occasions, I was invited to translate for not-for-profit events. So I think in a way I was at the right time with the right skills, with the right intentions, and they were capitalized on. The thing is, in occasions you think that you're the driving force of things to happen. Sometimes that's not the case.
A lot of times that's not the case.
And the thing is it is important to realize that it's perfectly okay not being in charge of things, but actually eventually driving the car that is given to you.
So how did you said that you got it didn't necessarily happen that things started coming to you, but still, how did people know you in the first place? I mean, you came to a place where
Well,
nobody
that's
knew
the
you.
thing. I made the conscious. First, nobody knew me in this place. I was nobody. From being like a high potential executive from a big corporation, in essence, I became nobody. So I realized that in order for me to get to know people, I had to knock doors. I volunteered. I began that way. I volunteered for a not-for-profit organization to be able to keep my sanity where it was. And next thing I know, I'm being invited. So one thing led to the other one. And by consciously accepting the fact that I was nobody and I needed to get to know people, and not necessarily people were going to knock my doors, but I was in need of knocking doors. So it was a humbling experience that I think I appreciate now, because at the end of the day, I continue to be nobody in the sense of that I'm famous or no. It's just, you have to keep on knocking doors, regardless of your position, regardless of who the heck you think you are. We have to have a spot for humility and realizing that actually commanding attention is a consequence of something like leadership, but it's never an objective in itself.
I like that one too.
Well, thank you. I'm gonna trademark those two.
So, during this time, obviously you came to the country because you were in love, and there's a wonderful euphoria that comes with that. And yet, you left behind everything and you were nobody, in your words.
Right.
So what was your emotional spectrum? Were you at peace and calm? Did you have any like roller coaster emotions? What were you going through there?
A change of that size is never an easy change. I would lie to you if I say that it was just a rosy picture. There's some tough days when you are moving from one place to the other. There are things about yourself that you don't like. What I did, and that was because of my husband's work, I was provided with access to consultants where I began working and crafting where I wanted to go. One of those I remember was taking this Highlands battery test, which is an assessment that is probably the most complete that I've ever taken, because it measures you in 9 different dimensions, and it puts you in more in connection to your values, to your interests, to your natural strengths, abilities, and the likes. And that was very helpful because I learned things about me that I didn't know before, and it put me in the right direction, at least clarified where I was, not what I thought I was.
Ah.
And that was really uh, I was confronting myself at some point with those things. But at the end of the day, that was part of the cutting intellectual fat that I was mentioning, because I was black and white there and able to reassess what I wanted. So I think it was a good thing. It was painful at times, but I think it's a way of finding truth when in the midst of changes. You want to have some kind of guidance, and I got that guidance not only from that Highlands battery test, but also consultants that were helping me at that time, provided by my husband's work at that time. So it was helpful, guided, not necessarily on my own. And those are the kind of investments that are willing, I mean, it's important to make at some point.
Right.
But I'm not gonna lie to you; it was not necessarily easy at times, and but eventually those bad days become more of the good days, and eventually you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and the relationships you begin making at the beginning, they begin respecting you because they get to know you, and then you expand horizons and begin making friends. Then the social aspect, you know, increases in size and importance, and then you find the right friends that bring you home all the time. So it's a process. It's a process that begins somewhere, somehow, and continues as much as you want to.
So let's play upon that a little bit more. You mentioned it's a process. Do you think that it's a formulated process? In other words, could somebody looking to reinvent themselves follow your formula and
Hmm.
achieve a reinvention?
Hmm. It's as much as say that I'm an example of anything, and I'm not. Each individual is different, and each individual should find his her own way of the their path for reinvention. And reinvention is something you need to opt for. It's like motivation. It's deep
Right.
down within you, and if you find that strength, you're gonna carry on. If not, guess what? You're not. So I think it depends on each individual and the interest they have, how serious they are about changing, if there's a need for change. Um, it's a very personal path.
Do let's say the need for change, and you talked earlier about that you started to feel that you were ready for change.
Hmm.
Um, do you think that that's something that people readily recognize in themselves, or uh, does it take more something either external profoundly hitting them over the head with it? As one woman described it, it took the 2x4 of her getting laid off to
Hmm.
find her own, kind of next calling?
Hmm.
Or is it that you need to see internal signals, and what would those internal signals be?
It requires a lot of reflection and connection with yourself. Not everybody is ready to have that inner voice, paying attention to that inner voice. Some might say that it's a spiritual calling, but in any event, it requires the need of being in close contact to you as an individual. Is not easy. Not everybody loves to preserve the status quo. Why moving things if things are okay? So people stay in their own places because they choose to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to take that path
Yes, it is.
as opposed to allowing yourself to listen to those voices. There's only one, actually, one calling about something. And it's important to be in contact with that inner calling, uh,
Right.
because that's the calling for a better you, I think, in most of the cases. And is that to be embraced or to be ignored? At the end of
Mm.
the day, it depends on you.
So, in the process of recognizing that inner voice
Mhm.
and moving it forward, do you have any advice for people who are looking to reinvent, who have recognized that voice and have said, I want to reinvent myself. I'm ready to change. I just don't know what I want to change into.
Mhm.
Are there any specific things that you can advise them right now that they could act upon right now?
Right. Well, first is taking the time to think, feel, and assess. And then in my particular case was the Highlands battery test, assessments of that sort that can help you. It's a guide of thinking clearly. But the most important part, like an alcoholic, is recognizing that you have something that is kind of calling you. And that requires the capacity of just sitting down and begin thinking with yourself and talking to yourself. And
That could
then
be a dangerous thing.
it's scary. For the most part, not everybody likes to take a look to yourself in black and white and say, guess what? This is okay, this is not okay. This is if I want to move on, I probably need to reduce that
Hmm.
or increase that or change that. Change is scary. And it's important to assess first, accept, guide the change, and move on. Because if you don't pay attention to that, it's always going to be there. And
Do
you
you
cannot,
have, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say, sometimes it might lead to make you feel that you are incomplete if you don't act upon that.
Right.
How?
Do you have any advice for that part of the fear factor, the scary part about overcoming that?
Mhm.
Did you in particular do anything, or have you since recognized either in other people or yourself things that have helped you conquer a fear of this type?
Well, fear is to be embraced as well. The first thing to do about fear is accepting that you're fearful and that's okay. People that are courageous are not the ones that do not feel fear, are the ones that know they are fearful, yet they're able to move on. I think that's the difference. It's okay to be fearful. It's okay to say, I'm afraid I'm not finding the right way of moving ahead, and that is causing stress. So I think it's okay. It's embracing it and finding a way to overcome it, knowing that you still have it.
Excellent. I have one last question, and then I'm going to open the floor up for Q&A. Um, this applies to people who are reinventing themselves into something very different than what they did before. Um, you went from being a corporate executive to
Mm-hmm.
being a nonprofit leader. So one could say that you took a series of skills that you had
Mm-hmm.
and that you applied in one kind of career and are applying them or some of them in this career.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, was this a world that you knew? Or how does one cross that gap? It's the question of doing something very different, but knowing that that's how you want to reinvent yourself. How do you cross that gap?
Mm-hmm. Well, in this case, I would say that my skills were at the right moment at the right time for the not-for-profit sector, because the not-for-profit sector is migrating. It's not the typical let's have some passion about things and try to do something about it. Sustainability is about bringing a business model that sustains what you believe in over time. That requires a very clear set of business skills. um, so I guess people recognize somehow that those business skills were in me because I was there doing that stuff for corporate America. I was well trained. Exxon was one of many organizations, multinational organizations that I worked for. And on top of that, I had, before coming to the US, I already had a master in business administration. So the business skill set was clearly there. And I believe that probably was just capitalized on by some individuals that detected that it was very helpful for the time being, or the time back then. And then I was brought by virtue of necessity to the not-for-profit sector. Once I was there, I liked it and I stayed by choice. So I guess it's not necessarily something that I did consciously. It just so happens that I was there with the right skills, with the right intentions, and then the rest happened by itself.
Well, I might think that there's a little bit more that you did to help facilitate your own destiny, my dear, but I'm going to open the floor for Q&A now, so we keep on schedule.
Okay.
I do have a question here, and it's from Ken Simon, who says, would you recommend working in the nonprofit industry? They are lower paying jobs than in the private sector.
It all depends what you want to do. If money is your inner calling, then don't move it. Don't change. You have to be very clear that it's got to have some kind of passion involved, that you have to believe in the cause, and then do the change. If money is your real motivation, then don't change.
Okay. And does anybody else have a question? We'll give a few seconds. Otherwise, we're going to call it a wrap. But before we call it a wrap, I want to take us back to you, Guillermina. This is how the audience can get a hold of you. Your email is ggonzalez@Delaware Arts Alliance, and the Twitter handle is DEArts. Guillermina, is there anything that you have coming up, or do you want to talk about the organization itself? A quick second.
Yep, just briefly, the Delaware Arts
plug.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, well, just briefly, the Delaware Arts Alliance is the arts advocacy organization in the state. We make the connection for the arts in two aspects: economic development and education. And we secure funding for the arts. We don't handle that money, but at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that the arts are elevated in the conversation, and that the arts are in its right place in the state.
Excellent, excellent. We did have another question come in, and it is, do you find the nonprofit sector more rewarding than the for-profit sector?
Yes. I think that when it comes to even leadership skills and strategy skills are refined by necessity in the not-for-profit sector, because you have to do a lot more with less.
Yes.
So from that perspective, yet it refines you professionally speaking.
Yes. Having worked in the nonprofit sector myself, I can tell you that it's a wonderful fertile ground for guerrilla marketing and bootstrapping. So if you want to get those skills, do a stint at nonprofit. Okay, folks. Well, I'm going to tell you about our next coming webcasts. You can always go to reinventionworks.com/webcasts to find out about the next ones. We're actually, since this was a reschedule, our next guest is not Toby Bloomberg. So we will have it posted on our website. You can go to reinventionworks.com or reinventionworks.com/webcasts for the full schedule. But they're always at 8:30 p.m. on Wednesday nights, unless we're doing a reschedule. Please help spread the word. Tell your friends. Tell them to register. And if you are on social media, use the hashtag #ReinventionWorks. And if you know of any organizations that are looking to sponsor a program about profound change for adults in their lives, we are looking for sponsors. So we welcome that as well. So everybody, and Guillermina, thank you so much for being our guest. Thank you, audience, for being there. And we are going to say goodbye and good night. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye.